Hello, everyone. Ian Hamilton here with Good Virtual Reality, joined by Avi Bar-Zeev. Where are you based in right now, Avi?
I'm in Oakland.
Why don't you run us through everything you've touched over the years?
Sure. Yeah, in 35 years, you get to touch a bunch of stuff. So I started out wanting to make movies and decided I didn't want to go work for Pixar because that would be one of 300 people. So I was like, let's do VR. I saw Star Trek in the holodeck and like let's just go build a holodeck and then I can make movies. And 35 years later, we're almost ready to be able to start doing some of that, but still not quite there. And I just saw how bad the tools were, how bad the tech was, the hardware, the software, everything just needed so much work that I've spent all this time trying to facilitate better everything, better tools, better devices. And so that very first startup I did went nowhere. It was back in 92, but I did do a cool demo and it managed to get me noticed by Disney. And then I went to work for Disney. We did this Aladdin VR ride with some really cutting edge headsets that were so heavy they had to be suspended from the ceiling. It'd break your neck. But the visual quality was amazing and it ran at 60 frames per second. It was super awesome for the time for 1992. And that experience really set me up for a lot of success because I spent a whole bunch of years being an expert on 3D graphics and game engines and how to make things really performant. That was really needed back then because there was no Unreal or even Unity that you could just go build stuff in. And so that was my career for a while. And then so I did a bunch of stuff and wound up meeting some of the same people that I worked with at Disney later. They used to work for a company called SGI. Some of them had started their own company called Intrinsic Graphics that was doing a game engine. And I went to work for them and we spun off a company called Keyhole. And that built the first version of Google Earth. A few years later, Google bought it, renamed it Google Earth, but I wrote the first versions of the client on that for that product. That was a lot of fun, and that's probably still to date the thing I've done that has had the impacted the greatest number of people. But it's got something like 2 or 3 billion users. Now it's just part of Maps. It's not even its own thing that much anymore. But it got up to 1 billion users. That was pretty amazing. And so that was interesting, and then after I left that, I went to work with, Philip Rosedale and Corey Andreka on Second Life and got some more experience of building scalable virtual worlds, and worked on the engine for that as well as other tools, like I wrote all the code that builds all the primitives in the world. I happened to write a little bit of code 'cause I knew how to do computational geometry from college, and it was useful to be able to write that. Those were my contributions there, and then went back to consulting and moved to New York and did a few other things. And then around 2008, I realized I needed to get a real job. I had kids, needed healthcare. And so I went and worked at Microsoft and tried a few things there. First, I was working more for the map side of things. But then I managed to hook up with some people in Xbox who wanted to figure out the next big thing. And we figured, hey, let's do AR. Nobody's doing this. It's new. Maybe it's around the same time that this was 2010. It's about the same time that Magic Leap was starting, Google Glass was starting, but really nobody was doing AR, at least openly. And so we started the HoloLens. And I was the first technical person on the HoloLens. And then after Microsoft did a few other things there, went to Amazon and got to work on flying robots. I've done robots a couple of times and AI a couple of times, and then migrated to do Echo Frames at Amazon. And that was pretty cool because it's like, well, HoloLens is what if you put everything in a computer on your head, and Echo Frames is starting at the low end. What if we did the minimum and just started with audio and maybe added cameras later and AI and all that stuff, which is, imagining is essentially what's happening today with what we call smart glasses route. And this was around 2014, 2015. And then started looking around again. Amazon was fine. I could have stayed a while, but I had a friend whose company got acquired at Apple, and I had interviewed at Facebook. It was still Facebook back then, just thinking about what if I got back into AR more fully. And I asked my friend whose company had been acquired at Apple, can you connect me to the exact right person to do what I want to do? I know you can't tell me what they're doing, but you know what I want to do. So find me the right person and let's start that conversation. And Apple still couldn't tell me anything about what they were doing before I was hired. I told them, if I'm not the right person and if you're not doing what I want to do, please don't hire me because I probably won't stay. So I did get hired and we did do some cool stuff. The part of it that I can talk about is the Apple Vision Pro. I can't talk about anything else that we may have prototyped because we really had our fingers in everything and all sorts of concepts.
Wow, that's why I wanted to get into this discussion. That brings us pretty close to present. when we start talking about smart glasses. And um, I I find myself shocked a little bit by getting pulled in different directions by companies like Meta. I'm wondering if you can remember this trend about maybe it was 5 years ago, maybe even 10 years ago now, when they were saying that privacy policies should be really easy to read, that there should be a trend towards making them really, really easily digestible. Um, I don't, that period came and went. Now I read these privacy policies and I can't make heads or tails of exactly how my data is used. And I watch news reports like the one that came out a couple weeks ago indicating all sorts of very scary things that might be happening relative to Meta Smart Glasses platform. And I spent years sort of watching Meta constantly change its privacy policy again and again, and the legalese changing in subtle little ways that always kind of downplay the fear factor while also just making it really acceptable for them to do what they want with your data. You start seeing things like not now on the consent screen, indicating that you're not going to have to do this yet, but we are going to make you do this eventually. And little things like that just leave a bad feeling for me relative to that technology. And that takes us to today, where uh, I see these two opposite platforms. I see virtual reality as this thing you do in private with sensors enabling what you do, but you're not affecting anyone else to go to a virtual environment and do whatever you want there. And the complete opposite of that being cameras recording strangers in public spaces and analyzing them for their behavior. And I want to see what you think of this overall trend. Is there anything that can be done to win more control for individuals over the use of their data?
Yeah, wow, so many things. That was a great setup. I could go in 4 different ways. Let me try to touch on it. First and foremost, I'll say that I don't use any Meta products to this date, even though I'd like to. The hardware is relatively nice and cheap, and while I'd love to play with it, I might even love to develop for it. Because I have all sorts of applications in mind, but I won't touch it because of their privacy policy. Because I read the privacy policies, both the legalese and the more human versions, and said, "No way is this safe. Like this is not safe." And I think that's my first issue. I do tend to criticize them a lot, but I'm really trying to help them. I want them to be better. Whether that they want it or not, I don't know. But I know people there, and the people are good people that work there. That they don't feel like they have a lot of choice. The mandates come down from the top. And they tell people, even though you don't need this data today, don't promise that you won't use it because we might start using it tomorrow. So if you have to go change your privacy policy, that's worse than just having an aggressive policy up front that takes everything. So basically, they give themselves the right in their EULA, which, I'm not a lawyer, but the whole idea of a EULA is just contemptuous to me, that this contract of adhesion, somehow I'm giving away my rights because I don't have any choice but to click OK. There's no other no option that I can click that lets me use the product in a different way. So, we don't have a lot of choice. And that's one of the final answers to your question is we have to give people more choice, but make it easy to understand. The purpose of making these privacy policies and EULAs easy to understand is so people do have informed choices. In science, when they do studies on people that are invasive studies, and I've seen a few, they want to know things about you. They want to ask you psychological questions in some studies. So this is personal, very personal information. They take your DNA in some studies I've been involved with. So there's this thing called informed consent, and both words matter. It has to be informed, meaning everybody has to understand, and consent. So Meta is not providing either. They're not really letting people be informed, and they're not really giving us any kind of real consent, not in any meaningful sense of the word. So the only answer that I have right now is to say no, which is sad because I'd like to use their stuff. Okay, so the consent part is the part that I want to focus on because that's where I think the solution lies. Although the informed part, maybe there's ways that our AI can start helping us, but it can read the privacy policy and help explain it to us or tell us if it doesn't meet our personal standards. So my AI can go and say, "Oh, no way should you sign this. No way should you click on this. It's against what you asked me to look out for you." But we're not quite there yet. We'll eventually have our personal privacy shields that'll be looking out for us and telling us what not to do. But so that's on the complexity side. On the consent side, you mentioned VR and environments. I think the important thing to do is to focus on this concept that I like to call, everything has a realities after it, right? Virtual reality, augmented reality. I like to call it consensual realities. So this is a consensual reality. We've both chosen to be in this conversation, and either one of us can leave if the other person starts acting like a jerk, right? It's consensual. And most things we do in life are like that. If you're in a meeting at work, it's consensual. People can get kicked out for bad behavior. The problem with the open worlds where anybody can join. And unfortunately, sometimes it's 10-year-olds to 13-year-olds who are there who don't even have a good concept of consent or appropriate behavior yet, especially when no parents are around, when no teachers are around, is there's no consent. The reason people are abused in those places is because a moderation model is not enough. You have to have a model of consent, and no special invisible spherical bubble is enough to solve that. It's just, it doesn't work to create an environment of consent. The one thing that can work in the short term is to only enter virtual worlds with people that you want to, that you consent to. So your friends, your family. And I've told every parent who has their kids getting in VR the same thing. And we don't have to spend all this time on parental controls. But if you wouldn't let your kid go to such a place in person, a bar or a mall or whatever, don't let them go online. Go with them. If you're going to go with them. So you're at least there as a chaperone. All right. So consensual realities are the solution, and you see it play out in things like Blue Sky, where people block each other left and right. When people, don't like somebody's politics or they don't like what they're saying, block, you're gone. You're gone from the world completely. It's a little more complicated when people can edit the world. That platform you're standing on might disappear if you block the author of the platform for being a Nazi. But that's the result of this approach. Nobody's really done that in VR, because nobody's really built a 3D world that's fully based on consent, other than small environments like Engage or things like that, where it's just a small group of people entering. But that's the right way to handle the so-called metaverse for now, is to keep it small and consensual, and then most of the safety issues are much less than they would be, because you know who you're entering it into that space with, and there's some accountability. There's social accountability outside of the virtual world that can be enforced, but you also enter with an understanding of what we're going to do. If you want to enter a player versus player kill world, everybody shoots each other immediately, fine, but just know that's the rule going in. So the people who don't like that won't go to that space. And you can imagine some ultimate metaverse built of multiple worlds with signs on the door for each space that say what the rules are before you enter, so that you know where to go and not go. We can build that. We understand that, but nobody has taken the care to really try to make that the norm. Maybe Rec Room, maybe other places have made efforts on it, but Roblox, you don't see a lot of that in Roblox. You don't see a lot of this concern about kids' safety, really. So it makes this stuff very scary. I think whenever I criticize, I also like to come on the other hand with mitigations, with things that you can do to help solve those problems. So we could have a really long, hour-long discussion on child safety if you wanted to, or adult safety, or what do these things mean? And the reality is just very few companies even take the time to implement it, because it's more expensive, they think. I think it's cheaper than lawsuits. If companies are proven to have abused children, that's going to be very expensive for them and harmful. But I think it's cheaper in the long run, but it's also the right thing to do. But it never seems like it is when you're facing deadlines, or you haven't thought about this enough, or you don't have 30 years experience to know what all the mistakes are.
Oh, there is so much to get into here and so many directions we can take this conversation. There's a specific example that I can think of last year of a mom, friend of my son's, wanted to give her son VR for Christmas. He was asking for VR for Christmas, and I had the Meta Xbox edition I purchased for myself just because it seemed like an important bit of history to have in my collection. I'm like, okay, I can take that down off the shelf and give it to your son. And the only stipulation is you, the mother, need to come over to my house and set it up properly with parental controls, going through all the hoops that Meta has set up. And she comes over to the house, and we spent a good hour and a half talking about everything and setting things up and getting her account set up, getting her son's account set up. And she goes away, gives it to him for Christmas, and comes back for a visit with my son with his headset. And she's sitting there at the table asking me, how do I lock him out of my account? And I looked at her and went, wait, explain to me the problem. And the problem is she has to set up the account. It's her account is managing the device, and then her son's account is the sub account on the device. And all the kid has to do is switch from his account to her account to access whatever he wants. And so
Yeah.
we spent a good 45 minutes of that gathering having her go into the headset for the second time or the first time to go and program her own passcode to lock her son out of her account and actually properly lock this down. This is a very smart, this is the person who I've given VR to coming to me with this concern, someone who should know better as a
Mhm.
journalist covering this space, and bringing this concern to me. And it just underscored that maybe 1 in 10 parents are probably just throwing a number out there, but maybe 1 in 10 parents are locking their own accounts to keep the kids out of their accounts, given this structure situation. And just underscores this need that exactly what you said of you should be going with them, right? You should be having two headsets, not just one. You should have the
Mhm.
the streaming mirroring up for you to watch as well. But it's such an illustration of exactly what you're saying here to have just 3 months ago have encountered this enormous problem that is not apparent to most parents out there, and it's built right into the very core of that offering. Is there anything you want to respond to on that anecdote before I go off in a different
No, you're
direction?
right. I would say 10 if we're lucky. I would say most of them, if they could, probably just set up one account and let the kid use the root account, and do whatever they wanted to. That has all sorts of other issues, but it's non-trivial to set up parental controls, even iOS, where they put an extra effort into making screen time easier. It's not the easiest thing in the world to set up, and things aren't always working right the way I expect them to, and I'm technical. So I'd say these things are complicated, but at the very least, the place where I think that Meta fell down the most is them saying they can't tell who's a kid. A passcode at best is the only way to separate the parent from the kid. My son has been trying to guess my passcode for 6 years now, and eventually he'll get it because there's only four numbers, and if I type it all the time, he keeps trying to look to see what I type. So the kids are clever; they figure these things out. But the idea that a headset that's tracking your hand and your head and knows how high you are above the ground can't figure out the difference between an adult and a child. Biometrically, a Berkeley study showed that a headset can uniquely identify you if you've been recorded in it within a minute or so, right? Just based on your unique motions. And they claim that we can't tell when the child is using the adult profile on the headset. No, this is a place where technology can actually come in and solve some of these things. What the simple answer could have been that the parent's the first one that has to put on the headset. It figures out who they are, and then the kid puts on the headset, and it figures out what biometric differences the kid has. Biometrics should always be stored locally on the device, never uploaded. So you have to do this on each unique device, but that's a small price to pay. And from then on, there's no passcodes. The device knows who's the kid and it knows who's the adult. That should have been the easy way to do it. And if it just so happens that the parents and the kids are exactly the same size, I mean, what 10-year-old is the same size as their parent? It can happen, but then there's other biometrics that we can put in play that will definitely tell the difference between adults and children move differently. You'll know within a minute whether it's the adult or the child if you put the right software on these things. So the science is there, the willingness to actually solve the problem is not there. End of rant.
It might have been the same Berkeley study or related Berkeley study, but I remember that one in particular showing things like you put text in two different languages on a wall, and based on the gaze of the person pointing their eyes at the text, they can identify what language you speak just by looking at your gaze and identifying
Mhm.
that you looked at English longer than you looked at the characters you don't recognize.
Yeah. Yeah,
Very
this one
alarming
is
stuff, yeah.
just using the head motion and maybe the hand motions only. So just the pose of the person is enough to uniquely identify somebody with 95% confidence. That's enough. 95% is enough to separate parents from children if they've both been biometrically identified locally on the device. That could have been the setup stage. Push one button, adult tries it, push another button, child tries it. Done. No more logins.
Great flow and a great flow for setting up all the watch features, letting the parent know to keep an eye on their kid, and you should always be watching your kid instead of sending them off into their room. So, switching subjects back to sort of good design ideas I found in VR. Private room codes feel like an absolute no-brainer for a solution to this problem. Walkabout Mini Golf is my favorite example of
Mhm.
this. Go in there and you type in a private room code, and it very much seems to me like it's a private address. You're creating an address in virtual reality where you simply give out that address, and only the people you want to get into that space can get into that space. It seems like a really good solution. I think about the idea of an entry space into your house and how most homes don't have that anymore. It's like an idea from the age that's now ancient of this space where mail might get dropped and people might take off their shoes and might knock at a secondary door to get let into the primary residence. It feels like something like that is necessary for this to work, for this whole idea of virtual worlds to be safe and easy to use. I would love to have a virtual address that exists only in VR where my mail can be dropped, where people can come into that space and maybe see a couple profile photos of me, maybe knock at my front door and see if I'm there. And if I'm there, I can come to the door and say, "Who are you and would you like to come in?" It feels like that analogy that I'm describing could work, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
why it hasn't. I feel like we got really close to that with Steam VR back in 2016, and then it
Yeah.
just went away.
Look, games have multiplayer games have lobbies for sort of either picking your teams or hanging out. Zoom has meeting codes, like you said, and a waiting room, right? So, this thing has been solved many, many times. There are patterns out there that work. And like you said, you could have a vestibule, you could have a semi-public space, which is off the street, out of the rain, but still not your private space that you're letting somebody into. I think where people who got excited about the metaverse may have gone wrong is that this was a debate that I've had, probably just talked about it with Neil Stephenson even way back in the day. I have one picture of me hanging out in the office from like 1992. I can't quite remember what we all talked about, but this is a point of contention that I would have with this idea that the metaverse is an objective space that everybody sees the same thing in the same place at the same time. I don't think it should be. I don't think it needs to be. The reality, you could argue whether reality is objective or not, but we absolutely have private spaces that not everybody's allowed to enter. And we also don't all perceive the world the same way. So I think you could easily argue that reality is not quite as objective. There may be objective truths, but we don't all see the same parts of the world. We can't access the same places, and we don't all perceive things the same way. So why are the metaverse solutions trying to create one vision of the world where everything's objective and it's just not tenable. So yeah, we should have those vestibules and those lobbies, and we should have branches of the world that are open or closed based on your intent, based on what you want to do. Like I said about the player versus player parts, the rules may change, the physics could change, and the age limits can change for places that are adult or not appropriate for different ages. So if you're going to try to stitch things together into a giant metaverse, you have to be cognizant of all the ways in which people have different experiences of the world, including ways that people can get hurt. And you have to design for that and not take the pure libertarian stance of we'll just build it and people can deal with their own thing. That's a recipe for the Wild West, and that's not a pleasant place to be. Even for the settlers who lived in the Wild West, it wasn't a pleasant place to be.
I gotta attack your use of the word metaverse now. I try very hard not to use metaverse in my lexicon because it feels like it's a word that Mark Zuckerberg very consciously branded across the space. I watched him
Yeah,
do interview after interview where he just kept repeating the word again and again and again. Then he renamed the company to Meta and he owned this space, like a very short URL where he gets to define the future. And I try very hard not to use that word for that reason. Where you started off this conversation, exactly where I start off this space. I want the holodeck. I've only ever wanted the holodeck. And it
yeah,
always felt like the right relationship to technology, a room for escapism,
yeah.
a room for safe training, right? It seemed like such a genius idea back when I saw it and watched all those episodes on Star Trek The Next Generation. And 2012 came around for me, and I went to try the dish that they had at Disney's Imagineering offices. They called it a dish, but it was a cave with a hat that you could wear and look down and see your arms and still be immersed in virtual reality with head tracking. And then within about 6 months, of that demo, I went and tried the Oculus Rift duct tape demo, their very first demo. And the gap between those two experiences in cost and feasibility was astronomical. This cave was hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars in cost, versus going and trying this design for a head mounted display that was in the hundreds of dollars and ran on your PC. And it's really what convinced me to focus on this technology as my career. It's this here was a holodeck as I would imagine it is still probably 100 plus years away, but here we have a near term solution that seems entirely feasible. And yet I am as guilty as many of the devs in this audience who are listening to this, many of the enthusiasts who have stuck it out for this long of just expecting each new headset to be the one that would be mainstream. My very first in-depth report on Oculus, so I went out and did that demo, and I also spoke to Stanford, I spoke to USC, I got those VR experts on the phone, and I think it was Stanford, Jeremy Bailenson saying, there's a joke in the field where each year some scientist says, this is the year that VR takes off. And that was 2012 when I have that committed to my clip record here. And now I find myself being that person who each year expects it to take off despite there being the reality of the market, right? So
Mhm.
that's a very long winded way of saying, how close do you think we are? How, is it next year or is it 10 years or 30 years?
Okay, so, I tried to go as quickly as I could through the history of what I worked on, but that demo that I mentioned was a projected environment. It was a cave of sorts. We called it the virtual environment theater, 3 sides, all rear projected, and it was really cool. And all the headsets in 1992 sucked. They were really bad. They were not, the visual quality wasn't good. They were heavy. And so I was always a fan of doing the projected environment for the purpose of doing a holodeck where you don't have to wear a device on your head. And it got me to Disney. And in fact, at Disney, even though I worked on the Aladdin's carpet ride, which was VR, I did convince them to build a 6-sided cave, which is the progenitor of the thing that you got to try, which was we figured out great ways to fold the optics so that the hexagon wouldn't be too big. And it showed up at Disney Quest, at least partially, a couple of screens of it, not a fully enclosed one. But Disney got it. And because, for high throughput theme park rides, you don't want to put a headset on people's heads. So the Aladdin ride, 4 people got to go up on stage out of an audience of probably 100, 150. Only 4 got to ride it because it took so long to get in and was so expensive. Everybody else had to just watch. So you really want something that more people can see and experience, ideally in their own homes. And the good news is we're getting closer to that vision with these LED screens that are coming down in cost. Hollywood is now using them as virtual backdrops in place of green screen for virtual production. That's going to drive the cost down a bit. But what VR really benefited from, more so than anything that Oculus did, Palmer, notwithstanding all his experiments. That, by the way, that stuff, as you probably know, was really pioneered at USC, the low cost approach.
FOV to go, yeah.
And Palmer spent some time there with Mark Bolas, deserves a ton of credit for being in the field for 40, 45 years at this point and having been there and done all that stuff with the boom and with the low cost VR approach. That was facilitated by cell phones. That was all possible because the LCD screens and the compute came down in price. So they were able to cram all the stuff that might fit in a phone into a headset at headset prices. And Qualcomm picked up the ball on that and did a lot of really great work at making the silicon really affordable. So that's the reason that you today can buy a $300 or $400 VR headset versus the $10,000 to $40,000 that we had to pay back way back when. It would not have come down in price if not for that. It's all about being able to drive costs down as you drive quantities up. Now, it's always a catch-22. Somebody has to go first. Somebody has to build the device that's already expensive to begin with, but build it so that all of the tools get made hardware tools in this case. The reason the LCD screens can be as cheap as they are is because of all the hardware tooling that had to be created in order to make LCD screens cheap. This is maybe a interesting bit of information because most people don't know this, but what I've learned from hardware is it's not the materials that are expensive. We're talking about silicon. super abundant. It's not expensive. There's some rare earths in there that are more, but it's the processes. It's the fact that when you first built an LCD screen and it had one dead pixel, you had to return it. That entire effort was wasted. You had to get the process perfect so that you can churn out millions of LCD screens at low cost, and then you can sell them for $1. That's what has to happen for VR to be, or any technology, AR, anything, to be cheap and mass consumer. But that requires somebody to invest in the tools, which means you have to expect the market to be there to make millions and millions of these to justify the investment in the tools. Every technology has this same hurdle, hardware at least, hardware has slightly different economics. But that's what holds back all these things. That's the reason AR is expensive. And so a lot of my career has been convincing companies to spend the first $1 billion in order to build the expensive thing that you can't sell for less than $3,500 because it was so expensive to build. You have to get that investment back. If you tried to sell it for less than $3,500, somebody would come along and make a business out of buying your free thing or $100 thing and reselling it for $3,500. So the money that you're not charging, somebody else would make. So you have to sell it for that amount. But what you do is in each iteration, you get the overall cost of production down lower and lower and lower until you can sell it for $300 or $400 or less. Anyway, that's the background. The answer to your question is, I don't think that VR, and this might be an unpopular opinion with your audience, but I don't think that VR is the thing that goes mainstream. I think that it takes a special kind of person to want to play VR, and it's not a bad kind of person, but it's somebody who has a higher tolerance for pain. Nauseation isn't a huge factor, which it is for me. It's hard. Honestly, the Apple Vision Pro was the first headset that I could wear that didn't nauseate me because so much work went into the techniques needed. It's not about the weight. It's about a whole bunch of other things that trigger the nauseation, physiological, psychological, all sorts of things. Which we could spend a lot of time talking about as well. But it's not a cheap headset, and it's really hard to make a cheap headset that works for everybody. Even just considering the sizes of people's heads, the shapes of people's heads, not everybody can wear these things, and certainly I would argue 10 to 13-year-olds should not be wearing these things, given that their faces, their heads, their brains have not finished developing yet. This is not a wise thing to do, is to put things on at that age. Not for more than 15 minutes. I let my kids try VR headsets for 15 minutes at a time, as many times as they wanted, but always a break. Never for hours at a time. Okay, so the reason why VR, though, I don't think is the thing that goes mainstream is not just about the hardware. It's about the use cases. VR use cases are mostly about escapism. Training is a big one, of course, but it's mostly about playing games, entertainment, movies, and maybe education is a good use for virtual field trips. I love all that stuff. But AR, the difference on the AR side of the spectrum is it's about our life usually. It's about we're the protagonist, and it's not escapism. It's communication. It's work. It's things that we do all the time. So if I had to put numbers, I'd say VR maybe 10%. Sort of uptake because it's the special thing that we do, and AR is the thing that we would do 90% of our waking time. If we had the right device, we would wear it all day long. And you see people buying smart glasses and wanting these display AR glasses, the early ones that are not very good yet, but they get you in the door. And it's just because there's so many more use cases, and it's such more of a lifestyle, daily, use kind of a thing, even if it's not used all the time. Like, it's not like a digital watch is used constantly, right? It's used a couple of times a day, but it's there when you need it. That's what AR is more about, those kinds of use cases.
So, a couple things to respond to there. I was nodding along here for my listeners here to you saying that maybe it's unpopular with my listeners. I don't think it's going to be unpopular with my listeners. A very real audience here. I'm always going to speak directly to them, and I'm agreeing with you that it's all those discomfort things are true. What I struggle with here, and one of the reasons I wanted to get into this with you today, is the gap between science and marketing language when we start talking about these sorts of things. It's why I already attacked the metaverse here and went for the holodeck. In the Vision Pro today, I have a device that is an opaque display, just like all of the other opaque displays. But the interaction space that you most often use inside that device is looking at your physical environment with objects floating within it. And that is AR in VR. And I just watched a decade of HoloLenses and Magic Leaps not find market fit. And there are still these people hiding out in their homes doing VR again and again and again through the discomfort. And there's all sorts of things like driving simulation or flight simulation that are simply unmatchable in any other medium, where you can sit in a
Mhm.
chair and one-to-one practice hours that you would up in a plane. And I'm looking at, these things where someone might spend $50,000 on a nice car or $20,000 on an upgrade to their car, and then they only have to spend $5,000 for a home rig to practice with their car without putting extra miles on the road. And like that's a small number of people who are going to have that kind of money to add those extra hours on a home simulation rig. But you also have the cockpit and the car to ground you and reduce some of those discomfort things. You can add a motion simulator underneath you to give you some of the things you need. And that's part of the $5,000 number that I'm talking about. I have an article on my site. I think I sent it to you about the Vision Pro being an augmented virtual reality headset. And it's really frustrating to have watched what happened to Magic Leap and the HoloLens projects and still see VR chugging away at home use with numbers of people, while these AR glasses don't provide me presence, don't transport me anywhere, and then have all of these privacy situations, and people don't want to wear them because they're too big. And then there's all these privacy violations. To your point, like I think it's fascinating. You said you worked on the Echo glasses because ultimately, I have several pairs of the Ray Bans, and I just stopped using them by and large. They started off as the MetaView app, I think it was called. And then one day they just said, let's rebrand it as Meta AI. Let's change all of our privacy policies. Let's move the goalposts from virtual reality into AI and into augmented reality and try to manufacture consent for these things in public, and one layer at a time, slowly getting you acclimated to name tags is the most recent thing that Mark Zuckerberg wants everyone to have in public. And at the very same time, the CTO at Meta is patenting the idea of keeping you inside of a social network after you die and posting as an LLM after you're dead. He's got a patent with his name on that with his for his company. I'm jumping around here to a lot of different places, but the underlying theme is that it feels like we have a winning architecture here for both. When you have VR providing wide field of view presence, and maybe you spend most of your time in augmented reality, mixed reality interaction space, but the underlying display type is a virtual reality headset. Am I wrong in that? Like, I have such a problem with the alternative, which is 50 to 70 degrees field of view, putting things in front of all the things I actually want to interact with all the time. I want fewer distractions when I'm out and about, or I want a vibe, and I don't see how visuals are going to help me vibe. Like I vibe with music playing in my ears,
Mhm.
not with postage stamp visuals. At one point, Microsoft sent me a HoloLens 2, I think it was. They sent another HoloLens kit to my colleague over in England. And we had an experience where uh, people at Microsoft brought out 3D models streaming from their server, showed us a globe, showed us social interaction. We had the simple avatars that are very similar to the meta avatars. They were probably the same avatars used in alt space at the time. And we had this whole social interaction with representatives from Microsoft, my colleague in England. Here I am in the United States, and all of us are interacting around a table that is shared between us. And I'm having to fill in the gaps of the field of view of the display optics
Mhm.
because it's such postage stamp. My mental load is off the charts trying to remember where everyone is and what everyone's doing because of the limited field of view.
Mhm.
Now, last month, I went into an Apple Vision Pro briefing where I had Resolution Games CEO Tommy Palm joining me, and several other reporters. And I'm sitting back here, and the field of view is wide enough that I'm seeing Tommy over here to the right, and I'm seeing the other representatives over here to the left. There's a big slideshow in the middle, and I've got it tuned to White Sands, so some wonderful virtual environment. But I could just as easily turn the dial, and now I'm in augmented reality, looking
Uh-huh.
at mixed reality, looking at my physical environment. And that might be a better, like, I can understand that many people would prefer their physical environment to the virtual one for a lot of use cases. But you add one more thing to this, which is the idea that aren't we just a few generations away from the resolution of those cameras being high enough to provide you better than 2020 vision through that same architecture?
Agree with you about the metaverse. I try not to use it because it's been abused so much. I think the name has pretty much been ruined. Same. I feel the same way though about augmented reality, virtual reality. The whole MR spectrum has been so abused by companies even that I've worked for that have used a mixed reality in ways that it wasn't really defined. That nobody knows what those things are. I'm really glad that Apple went with spatial computing as opposed to calling the Apple Vision Pro AR. They called the phone apps AR. They used AR when it was on your phone and used the cameras. But when it comes to the Vision Pro, they switched to using it to calling spatial computing. That's a term I used 30 plus years ago in that first startup. I don't think I coined anything. It was my boss brought it over from another use, but it really applied to what we were doing. It actually goes back even further in the field of architecture and urban planning. So anyway, I have a whole timeline of terms. If you ever want to look at it on our XR Guild site /timeline, you can see all the terms and when they come up, and it's a really good history of that. But agree with you on that part. I like spatial computing. I think it is descriptive of what the Vision Pro is doing. And I think the other thing I'll say is you mentioned the HoloLens, you mentioned the Magic Leap. I should also disclose that given all the places I worked as well, I'm on the board of directors of Magic Leap. So I do in some ways represent them a little bit. I don't speak for them. I don't speak for any of these companies, but I do have to be a little, thoughtful about what I say about these things. I would think generally, though, I think that none of the things you mentioned I would call failures. I think that they were all interesting for what they did. And the most important thing they did was move the ball forward. As I mentioned, to get to that final consumer stage, so many steps have to happen. You can't just say, I'm a genius, I have a new invention, it's going to scale up to 1 billion units. You have to go through all these phases of building things that are bigger and clunkier than what you'd ultimately want until you can afford to build the ultimate thing at a price point that people will pay for it. So they were all successes on the way. And the place they found the most success was not on the consumer side, but was on the industrial side, used on the factory floor. Used for business use cases and still being used in medical and repair. So those things are useful. They're just not probably what you or I would want to use in our daily lives for the most part. Even the Vision Pro, I'll be honest, I don't use it every day. I have one. I haven't bought the new one yet. It's still one of the best immersive experiences that I've had for all sorts of important reasons, including the way the display works, as you're pointing out, that it's an opaque display with cameras. That's one of the things that makes it good, but it's also one of the things that makes it heavier and makes it bigger than it would be if it were a see-through pair of glasses. Because in optical see-through, you get the photons for free; they just pass right through, so you don't have to do any work to collect the photons. But the display part is harder than it is in a VR style display. It's much harder to make a really good. You can't do, like you said. I can tell you exactly why the field of view is limited as well. We're limited by materials. So this is physics. This is the index of refraction of glass. Waveguides use this thing called total internal reflection, same thing used in fiber optics. And the light can only exit the glass at certain angles or it looks like crap. So you have a limited range of angles that you're allowed to physically exit the glass, and therefore that limits your field of view. So certain companies like Magic Leap and Applied Materials are investing a lot in new materials, which is also expensive to figure out. But new materials can double or triple the field of view because they have different index of refraction than the traditional glass being used in the waveguides, but they have other properties. Meta talked a lot about silicon carbide as a material that can get them 2x the index of refraction. It has interesting properties, but it's also very expensive because it's not manufactured in bulk yet. There's billions of dollars need to be invested in the supply chain in order to make that as cheap as LCD displays. So that stuff, all these products have to find their use and they have to pay for themselves, but ultimately they're all stepping stones to get to the next thing. So the implicit in your question is video see-through a good stepping stone? And I think it is a good stepping stone. I think it's not the ultimate answer. Ultimately, we would like the glasses to be transparent because it just fits more of a social dynamic. If we're going to wear them all day long out in public, no one should be wearing a Vision Pro while they're driving their car or even walking down the street. All those videos that came out when it first launched, I found very concerning because it's not really made for that. It's made for being in your house, in your living room, in your office, maybe even in your kitchen. And those can be made very safe, but it's not, it doesn't give you full awareness of a full 180-degree field of view that you'd want outdoors. And a pair of glasses, normal glasses like I'm wearing, do, because the light comes in from all sides and I have a better chance of seeing that truck that's about to hit me with this pair of glasses than I would in a Vision Pro or any VR headset. All right. So the question about the cameras, can the cameras get better? Yes. These devices can be superhuman. If they wanted to, they could already probably do night vision, right? The device has some infrared on it already. You can see your hands in the dark, right? Have you played? I don't know if you've tried a Vision Pro in the
Oh,
dark.
yeah. If you let the mapping do its thing, and that already feels like X-ray vision. If you go
Right.
map your whole house, right, and then you go back into one room, you've got a map of your whole house over there. It's
You can
already
see through the
very close
walls.
to
Yeah,
X-ray. Yeah.
it's very cool. So I think in general the decision that our team made was at this point in time that the video see-through was the right answer for giving a high quality experience in many ways, not just in the field of view. Yes, you can have a wider field of view, but one thing that is really hard to do with optical see-through right now is proper color blending. So everybody's aware of the transparency problem that blacks, you can't render a black on an additive display. You can only add color. You can't take it away unless you add some sort of opacity filter, which the Magic Leap 2 has. The Magic Leap 2 has something like a liquid crystal display in front of the display, and it can block natural light that allows you to have the deeper, darker colors inside your virtual display. Without that, the only other option you have is this thing that Microvision did, which is to say, well, let's just use lasers. Let's just make it more powerful than the sun. So you can go outdoors and the laser's shining more light in your eye with the virtual display than the real natural light coming in. I never quite bought off on that idea because I think you can imagine some of the potential issues. Every laser lab I've ever walked to makes me wear these orange glasses to protect my eyesight, and we're putting out a display that has lasers in it. I'm not the person to say whether or not that's safe, but I would be cautious. So and I've had some really great demos. And there was a company called iWay in Israel. They put on a laser display that I was willing to take a risk and try it. And when the dragon breathed fire at me, it felt hot. There was no heat, to be clear, but it was so bright that my brain said, "Oh my God, that's hot." And so it was pretty amazing. But the experts will typically tell you the laser's safe as long as it doesn't stop moving. Then it can bore a hole in your skull. So you gotta make sure that you have a safety system that shuts it off. So the other approach, if you don't want to do this intense laser thing, is to block the natural light behind the pixels that you want to put the virtual graphics on, and that allows you to do blacks. It allows you to get the whole colors. But that's not even the final answer because it gets more complicated. If I want to render red content in front of a red wall, I can't because it's already red. I can't add red to red. It's not going to be more red. So you want to block some channels of light and you want to potentially add in other channels of light. So what you'd want, even in an optical see-through display, are cameras like the Vision Pro has. You'd want real-time cameras, very low latency, that are looking at the environment, the background, and actually computing not just what color am I drawing, but what color do I need to add to get to the final color that I want. Knowing what's already in the world and knowing what my display is capable of, A plus B equals C, C is the final color that I want. So you need to be able to selectively block light and add light to be able to get to any color that you might want in the spectrum. The Magic Leap 2 does a little bit of the blocking. It does it regionally. It doesn't do it per pixel. It gets very complicated because this LCD display is only a couple of centimeters from your eye. It doesn't have optics in front of it, so it's not in focus. And so now this fuzzy layer that's blocking things is fuzzy. It's not crisp. And anyway, it's all really hard. And I could talk for hours about the things that makes optical see-through hard. Video see-through is easier in many ways. It's hard to do low latency. It's hard to do wide field of view. Those are not easy, but conceptually, you have fewer problems to solve and you get full control over the color blending. You can say, you know, if you're a company like Apple that cares a lot about visual quality and wants something to be high definition, really, ultimate looking everything and not, you know, kind of half-assed cardboardy kind of, not good visuals. You got to do video see-through. You just can't yet do optical see-through in a way that's compelling other than, what I've used this term and I heard Mark Zuckerberg actually use it too. We put an Apple Watch on your face. Like I call that watch face. When you just take the display of the Apple Watch and just put it up here by your eye, I don't think that's special, but some people certainly want that. It's not any better than having a watch on your wrist. It's just hands-free. But it doesn't provide a better user experience versus the watch. And I don't wear the watches that much because I don't get that much utility from them, but some people do and they want their notifications. They want all these things, so they're going to go put their watch on their face, and that's the next reality for the next year or two.
What I would like is a pair of prescription glasses that have maybe AirPod audio into them, very close to the Echo glasses. And then I attach my VR headset on over that when I'm at home and I want I want a full immersion computing platform. I feel like that model is going to work. Like I'm at home, I want fuller field of view. I get my augmented reality layered in on the video pass through. I take that off. I go out into the world, and I haven't taken off my prescription glasses the entire time. I'm not distracted from the physical world, and I don't see how visuals when I'm out and about are going to aid me in the same ways that the escapism back at home aids me. I don't want to be distracted from the people I meet. I would like them to introduce themselves to me, not the glasses to introduce them to me. I would not
Yeah.
like the glasses to warn me about people. I don't, that's also where it feels like AR glasses are going, or what the use cases are, is like, warn me about dangerous people. And it's like,
Yeah, it
that's what
that
I
some
do. That's my human senses are for.
Well, okay, so there's some people who want that, but I agree with you that's not the driving use case. So keep in mind that people come at the world from all different ways. What you're basically saying is I want to be immersed in reality. And that's true. I think when I'm out in the world, I want to be immersed in reality. That's not the time I want to be escaping from anything because reality is not always a safe place. And for most people, it's cars and trucks and things like that on the road. For some people, though, you got to imagine somebody who may feel physically more vulnerable than you do, right? You and I are both tall guys, and we could probably take care of ourselves in most situations. There's other people who feel more physically vulnerable. So the idea of glasses as a safety feature that can call for help when you need it, it can capture video of people doing things to other people or you that are bad, including the police, but anything bad happening. Capturing that scenario is actually a driving use case for somebody, although it might not be for you or me as much. And the warning of people being predators or things like that is also something that is appealing for people who have reason to be more afraid in the world for various harms that are out there. Being large white male has privileges, and I have a lot more safety than a lot of other people do. Let's just be clear about that. So just try to imagine those other use cases. And by the way, I've always tried in these companies to try to build the most diverse team that I can because I can't imagine all the use cases that somebody else might be able to imagine who comes from a different lived perspective. And so the DEI is not a bad idea from the perspective of what's right, but it's also a great idea from the perspective of just building better products for people, things that actually serve more people. So practical and correct. Anyway, this idea that you have of I can have my normal glasses and be able to slap on the extra magic lens when I get home, I think it's a good idea. I think the technology that's waiting on is what you would call meta surfaces. And so we're not going to be able to make a really lightweight VR clip-on display until you can program light down at the wavelength of light. So meta surfaces are really, really high density displays, very, very high resolution displays, higher than you would normally need for the human eye, but so high that you can manipulate photons at the wavelength of light and bend them and create colors and create patterns. And that potentially could be very, very thin and light. So you could imagine them being as small as a pair of clip-on sunglasses. But that's still a nascent technology. It's in the lab, people are working on it, and it has not just the ability to create a VR display, but for the AR side of things out in the world, one of the things I've always wanted, and you may be wearing contacts, but I have to wear reading glasses now, and I did ever since around, when I started working on the HoloLens around 2010. I'm like, damn, I need to wear glasses now, and it started understanding the lived experience of people who need to wear glasses. Where I had 20/20 vision before that, I never understood this. And so I started thinking about, I want the glasses to autofocus for me, even in the real world, because now I can go from reading a book up close to driving my car where I want to focus it, 10, 20 meters away. And the same pair of glasses could do both. There's a few companies who are working on that, but it still hasn't been commercialized. So I would love to see the meta surfaces in the AR case be able to be dynamic focus. That's the first most important feature. If it did nothing else, it'd be a $1 billion product because I wouldn't need to keep switching between different pairs of cheaters. I have ones for up close. I have ones for far away. I have ones for driving. Then think about sunglasses. We can improve sunglasses with the same technology. Why do I need to tint the entire world when I can just block the glare? I can block the glints on the cars, the headlights at night, or the sun. And now I don't have to reduce the contrast of the world. I can just block the things that tend to blind me. So you can start to have really cool AR displays with just this ability to have opacity filtering in the glasses. And now you're talking about lifestyle products that could be great for anybody. And that same technology then could also offer the VR display when I'm in a safe location like home or work. I can then be immersed in content that could fill my field of view. I think that will happen, but we're talking still minimum 5 years, maybe more like 10, 15 years for that tech because of all the development phases it has to go through. Same with contact lenses. I thought for years, this was back in 92, I dreamed of in a novel I wrote, of all things. I wrote about AR contact lenses. And the beauty is, if it worked, it's really hard. If it worked, close your eyes, you're in VR, right? Because the contact lens is between your eyelid and your eyeball. It would still work if you closed your eyes. So close your eyes, you're in VR. Open your eyes, you're in AR. Like that, wouldn't that be great? Yeah, there's a couple of companies that have tried to run up that hill, and they've all sort of run out of money because it's a really hard problem. Eventually, though, that's the one I think will take 30 years. That's not, maybe 100. Because it's such a hard thing. Even just FDA approval, there's a company called Innovega I know that they want to put a contact lens in, but it's not even a smart contact. It's a contact lens that allows you to focus an inch away on a display that's right there in front of your eye. So that display now becomes in focus. So you have to wear the contact and a pair of glasses, but it gives you a superpower. And especially for people with low vision, which is what they're targeting first, it gives people the ability to see for people who can't already see. So those are great use cases. The other thing you pointed out in your preamble was all the ways it can go wrong. So the problem I have is we have all these imaginations of let's come up with these great ways to help people. And then a company comes along and figures out, wow, we can really monetize this. If the way to do the name tag feature that Meta has discussed correctly, there is a way to do it correctly. That's consensual. The way to do it correctly is when I first meet you, you tell me your name and maybe you give me your consent. And once you've given me your consent, and remember, consent can be simple. Consent can be the way we bump phones today to exchange contact information. It could be me giving you a thumbs up gesture that's something unique enough that the device can say, oh, that person consented. My face is now stored, or your face is stored on my device locally, never uploaded to any cloud. And next time I see you, my device can Face ID you. So this is not a tool for finding predators because they won't give you consent. It's a tool for remembering things about the people that we interact with. And if you told me that your name was Ian instead of Ian, it would remember you saying, my name is Ian. And I would get that little hint saying, well, let me not mess up his name the next time I see you. So it's about facilitating social interaction, not cheating. Like at most it's cheating on our memory, but not cheating in terms of knowing things about people that they didn't want us to know. So there's a right way to do that, but that's not the approach that Meta seems to be taking, because if you take that same idea to its logical conclusion, if my phone or my glasses can ID the people who have consented, we can also solve the bystander privacy problem, because now the glasses can automatically blur the faces or use Gen AI to replace people who have not consented. So none of the people who I don't know show up named in my video. Only the people I do know show up named in my video. And only the ones that have consented are the ones that keep. So your friends, your family, all the people who consent are in your photos and your videos just fine. But all the bystanders are essentially anonymized. And we could
Meta
solve
has that
bystander
technology.
privacy. They absolutely
Meta
have the
demonstrated that
technology.
technology. They published the research paper that shows it, but they've chosen not to ship it. They've chosen a different route for this idea of taking photos, feeding it into their server farm, and then you layer AI on top of that in whatever way, shape you want. And it doesn't
Because
feel I don't get it. I don't want that.
what that gives them, you don't get it because it's not for you. The feature is for them. They have total surveillance of the web. Between Google and Meta, they have enough bugs on every website you visit. If you ever log in, I use I use Google stuff, but I use it only in the Chrome browser, and I'm only logged in the Chrome browser. I never log in from any other browser to Google stuff. And that's because that's the only way I can pretend to even remotely be anonymous to them. Even then, they can fingerprint you and do all sorts of things. So they know where you're going on the web, on the mobile web, everything. They have it. What these glasses will give Meta, and maybe Google if they decide to use it the same way, is total surveillance of what people do in real life, which they don't currently have, right? They might have your location from your mapping app that tells them where they are, but they don't have what you're shopping for. They don't have who you're talking to. What they will have through these glasses, unfortunately, is the full knowledge of every place you go, everybody you talk to, every product you look at. They'll know your sexual orientation because that's completely obvious. Once you add eye tracking to glasses, you can absolutely know what people are interested in sexually by what they look at. You'll know how people feel about each other. You'll know who's best friends and who secretly wants to boink who, and who hates who. You'll know that from studying the information from the glasses. So now they can build the most comprehensive profile of what everybody's thinking and doing in their private mind, effectively mind reading. And it doesn't require you to wear the glasses. It just requires people around you to wear the glasses to get a lot of that information. So this is a dangerous world that we're entering into, and we absolutely have to protect ourselves from it. And the first step is to say no. These features, so-called features that they're adding, are not acceptable because we know where they lead. They lead to the same place that the web has led to, that we have to undo now. 20 years of social network invasions that have caused harm. So we got to figure out something better. And that was one of my prime motivations for going to Apple, even though I knew they couldn't tell me what I was going to do there. I'm like, if any company is going to try to do this right, but at least they take privacy seriously. That was my big thing, is at least they're willing to stand up to the government, at least back then, and say no when the government's trying to hack all our phones to get data, no other than through legal means. So I respected that. And I said, okay, this is a company that I can help. And Facebook was never that for me. Meta was never that for me. So this is the world we live in. And my soapbox here is make choices with your dollars, make choices with your feet, because that's kind of the only control we have at this point, is to do the thing that Scott Galloway is saying, resist and unsubscribe, to get rid of some of the things and send a message economically, if no other way, that these things piss us off, and we don't want you to do it this way. The companies do tend to respond. You saw with the Disney thing with Jimmy Kimmel, like the companies have to make money. So if you hit the bottom line, then they will have to respond. They don't always respond honestly. They might respond by saying, we're totally pro privacy, and half the people will believe them. But then there's enough people out there to say bullshit. That's not. Show it to me in the terms of service, and show it to me in the product features.
When I see Mark Zuckerberg spend $2 billion in 2014, he unites an industry to go and throw their money into the same idea. He convinces a whole bunch of people to throw their money at the wall, and Mark Zuckerberg is such a genius. Maybe we can also grift off of his genius. So maybe we can also profit off of his genius too. Then you give it about 8 to 10 years, and he starts throwing around metaverse and starts trying to brand this whole space in his terms. I when you start talking about the ways to resist, it comes down to language in a lot of, to me, is how do you communicate to a large number of people what specifically you're saying no to, or what specifically you're saying yes to on the other extent of that. And that's why I come back to this place of like, when I go to a virtual environment, I'm not hurting anyone. I am doing the most private thing imaginable. Only me and this universe can see what I see. In fact, it's more private than you looking at this computer screen that I'm looking at now to communicate with you, because the photons are only coming from my eyeballs. And I feel like I'm losing a war here over words and over shared understanding of reality over words, because we can't We can't share a lexicon. We can't share what we like about this stuff and what is worth keeping and what is worth rejecting. So I come back to the video pass through and VR as this thing where the core of what you said about discomfort is true. But at the same time, what I've noticed on the Vision Pro in particular is they called it spatial computing, they called it augmented reality on the phone, and augmented reality being the larger idea that they're going for. But still, the best virtual reality I experience today is in the Vision Pro when I tune my environment to Jupiter and I lay my hands down at my side and my cat lays on my chest and I start playing Pac Man floating right here in front of me with my cat laying on with my cat would be blocking my view of everything if I wasn't wearing a VR headset. But instead, virtual reality is still showing me my Pac-Man screen on Jupiter while my cat is purring on my chest, and I'm getting that amazing haptic feeling of a warm animal purring right into my chest. And
You
so,
need an
like,
API for the cat.
yes, I've emailed Tim Cook that I would like cat detection. I
Exactly.
really need cat detection. But, like, where I'm going with this is that it feels like VR maybe you're right about a large majority of things being too uncomfortable for people. But I still see the optical stack winning a battle here for numbers, for millions of headsets. That if VR isn't the interaction space that most people use when they go into a headset, it's still the canvas upon which augmented reality displays for a great many use cases, for perhaps a majority of use cases. How many hours per day do you spend outside versus how many hours per day do you spend indoors in your home? And I would wager for most people, it's probably 70-30 indoors versus outdoors, maybe even greater than that. And just if your use case is indoors, this large headset wins for a lot of reasons. And you're saying that yeah, supervision is certainly capable. Like it feels like we are closer to this future where there are tens of millions maybe even hundreds of millions of VR based devices that still leave us interacting in mixed reality most of the time because that's where the people are. That's where our physical environment is that we want to layer in with everything. And I go back to papers from the 1990s where they're talking about the lexicon here and how we normally refer to them as VR headsets
Mhm.
even though there's other architectures here and people are referring to them wrong. And so like I very much throw virtual reality and VR headsets at a lot of terminology just because it's a term that is in people's heads that they know that they can relate to. And every one of them also is in the same camp as you saying, don't we really want glasses? Don't we really want something that doesn't weigh anything on our face? And yeah, we do. But also, presence in virtual reality is demonstrated magic and escapism is what we do in every form of media that we already have. So like I want to come back to this one more time with you on just the terminology here of how do we build a coalition of people who say, I like this here. I don't like this here. Like I
Yeah, I
want to
get that.
be able to we can say both those things.
Yeah, so I would try to steer you away from the VR, AR, MR spectrum. I think that that's a bit outdated at this point, and I think the Vision Pro kind of demonstrates why, because it is a spectrum. And the paper identifies 4 discrete points along the spectrum, then gives names to those, but we could be anywhere on the spectrum. So, do we really need to be debating is this augmented virtual reality 20% and 85, like the whole spectrum is interesting. So I would just say that's one dimension. So I'd simplify the whole debate about AR, VR. Say there's one dimension, and you can call it the virtuality dimension if you want. It's the how much of the environment that I'm seeing is real world versus artificial world. And even then it's more complicated because real world might not be where I currently am. It could be a virtual travel situation where it's photorealistic using Gaussian splats and the best capture we can do, so it's real world, it's just not my real world at the moment. But that's one dimension, the virtuality dimension. And that even then it's more complicated because you say, is it real or fictional? And then how realistic is it? You could take a real world and fictionalize it. You could make people have done this, Minecraft filters and the Vision Pro that make the world look blocky, right? So even though it's the real world, I've added this extra fictionality layers.
Gives you
I
an
think the
out
right
of body experience real fast. Yeah,
it
you get
does, it does.
real, yeah.
And for a bunch of reasons, but I think that one of the most important things that AR, VR, the whole spectrum have in common is it's incredibly important what your POV is. All this technology is based around this idea that you're a unique person, you have a unique POV. We're going to cater to that. And whenever you move, the world adjusts to your motion to render the world the way it should be from your perspective. That's the one thing all these technologies have in common is this idea of it's all centered around your POV, which is another way of saying your context, which is why AR and XR are fundamentally unified under the hood is they're all fundamentally about context. It may be context of what do you want to buy or context about where are you and what do you see, but they're all flavors of context. And AI devices today are actually using XR technology under the hood when they put cameras and algorithms that can sense the world. That's the same technology we've been developing for years in XR for what we called scene understanding, world understanding, right? It looks at the world and figures out what's the geometry of the world and what's the meaning. Is that I have an electric keyboard in front of me, a computer keyboard over here. All the understanding of the world is using what we're today calling AI, but we have always called computer vision or machine learning. Okay, so fundamentally, what you're getting at, I think, this MR continuum is just one piece of the puzzle, and I would not focus only on that. In terms of answering the question of what do we care about, what we care about is the quality of the experience. What we care about is that the experience is catered to our needs and not forcing us to conform to somebody else's idea of what we should be doing, and that it's safe, that it's comfortable, that it's a meaningful experience. Those are the things that are really important to push back on when they don't succeed. The specific technology used is going to change over time. It is going to be whatever is the best solution today. Fundamentally, we have one common problem here, which is you can't get everything in one package right now. There are trade-offs. And so designing any device means picking some things that are going to be bigger, heavier, or hotter, or trading those off and doing less. And this because it's impossible to make the perfect device that does everything today, even with modularity. So even with your idea of adding the VR lenses on top, there's still going to be issues that are difficult to make in any kind of modular way. And even adding modularity itself adds expense and complexity. So the world of computers has evolved to this point. We have phones, we have watches, we have laptops, we have larger PCs. We have different devices for different uses. The laptop is really good as a workstation, but doesn't move all the time. It's heavy enough that I don't want to be carrying it around the house. I dropped it once and it was not a pretty thing. So you don't want to carry your laptop around, but my phone I can drop and it's pretty safe. And my watch, if I wear it, it is strapped to my wrist. So it's even safer. The different devices have different capabilities and they're used for different use cases. So I think we're going to be in a world of people having both. They'll have if they want, their high-end VR system that does amazing things when they want it at home. And they'll also have a pair of glasses. And the pair of glasses they'll put on, they'll go outside. And there's no reason for one device to have to try to do everything just yet. Eventually, we get to a world in which, if you look at the new Apple Neo thing they announced is a good example of this. It's a phone chip. So the phone has now graduated to being a computer. And if you just integrate a keyboard and a screen, you can make a reasonably priced computer out of a phone, right? That's how powerful the phone has become. So the convergence happens over time as the costs of the components go down and somebody can put them all together and make them cheap, but they'll stay separate for a while in the same way that laptops and phones have stayed separate for a long time. And so we'll have multiple different devices and that's okay. And they might be by different companies. So pick and choose the devices that you like the best. And unfortunately, it's not as easy on the pocketbook as you'd like. But even if you tried to combine them, that would add expense. That wouldn't necessarily make it cheaper.
So, final question here. Can you remember a particularly memorable moment of presence inside of VR? And can you share that with us?
I got a bunch. So I give you the very first one was we worked on this Aladdin's Magic Carpet ride. It required a $1 million computer per user, right? That's the level of supercomputers required as an SGI supercomputer. And we had a bunch of them. We had one per seat. And the very first thing I did when I joined trying to be clever was I figured out how to shrink everything down so we could run at least 3 different shows all on the same computer, and that allowed us to do multiplayer in 1992 because now I could see the 2 other people in real time also on their magic carpets. Now, if you looked at them, it was just a carpet and a pair of hands. There was no body, but just adding the headset, I added in the virtual headset that tracked their motions as they moved. I could tell it was a human being just by the way it moved without a body, just the hands, just the carpet, just the headset. I was like, holy shit, that's another person in a virtual world with me running in high fidelity. And that wowed me. And that was back in 92. I'd say the next probably biggest one was um an experiment that I did. I won't say what company because they like to keep everything kind of proprietary, but an experiment that I did, my team did, where we wanted to see what was more important, latency or correctly offsetting the cameras. If you have cameras on your head, the cameras should be in your eyes to be perfect. They need to be where your eyes are, but they're out in front and usually offset, right? So that can cause warping of the image. It gives you the wrong perspective, and that's enough to make you fall over if you do it badly. Meta solved this by doing some clever image warping using a depth map of the scene. We just solved it a lot more simply by using a depth camera and reprojecting all the imagery. So that to me said, hey, actually, it's not the latency that's making me sick. It's the fact that the imagery is not in the correct position for where my eyes are. And this particular test proved that if you are going to do video see-through, you'd better get this feature right. You'd better get the repositioning, the what they call it reprojection of the cameras to be exactly right to put the virtual camera inside your eyeball. And when you do that, now you can make eye contact with people. And now it actually feels like you're looking at each other. I'd had that experience once before using a depth camera with fusing depth and color together to make what I call a virtual hologram. It doesn't mean real holography. It just means Star Wars sort of style holograms. And I could make eye contact with a virtual person in video fidelity. And it was like, holy shit, this is what we need in social scenarios. We need to make eye contact because it's just disconcerting to not be making eye contact all the time. It's very socially isolating. So happened repeatedly in various points through my career where we had this magic aha moment where it's like, that's a real person. That's not just a simulation. That's not just a non-player character, but there's a person behind it and they have thoughts and feelings. And, we should be having that more and more. That's a feeling we want to have all the time is that's not just somebody I can shoot. That's a real person. And they have feelings as well. So I better treat them well.
Oh, I love that. I love the anecdote of multiplayer from 1992. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for the time. That is Avi Bar-Zeev. You've got a longer resume than I can imagine anyone else in the space having. So I thank you for the time today and hope to have you back sometime.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.